Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and welcome to book number 23 of the Star Trek Next Generation tie-in novels, War Drums. This was published in 1992, and while racism is a particularly heavy theme in this, I really don't feel like I can do justice to any discussions of genuinely controversial topics, so I'm going to focus on the inconsequentials that I really enjoy about this book. Also because the racism themes are remarkably heavy-handed, and are frankly, I mean, it's good, clean, fun drama, and the finger-wagging overtones are significant, and Star Trek has a long history of at least trying to tackle these sorts of issues. However well or poorly however well or poorly you feel it has been achieved, it's clear that Star Trek has been trying to tackle these since the very first original Star Trek, and it's something that continued all the way through. Because, of course, the whole point of science fiction and fantasy in a lot of ways is to, or at least one of the valuable things you can do with science fiction and fantasy is to tackle a serious social issue or problem by taking it out of its context and saying, here's a situation that is like an issue we are dealing with, but we can strip down some of the context, we can focus on a particular central issue in it, and also we're not pointing a finger at anyone in particular because, these are Klingons and human settlers on the alien planet of Selva. These are not riots in LA over Rodney King, because it was 1992, and as the foreword points out, it was an unexpectedly timely publication. But the big thing about this was that this is, I think, the only Star Trek novel I own that stars Ensign Ro. Ensign Ro Laren, the Bajoran in the bottom right corner, is one of the most popular Star Trek characters who appeared in so few episodes, because while she was a major central character in those episodes, she was a semi-regular. And so, she's a great character. She takes no crap from anybody. And her introduction was also very much the introduction in the whole of the Star Trek franchise to the Bajoran Cardassian issue, the Bajoran diaspora, the issues with Bajor, and all of that stuff. Ro Laren is kind of the character who started off all of those things that eventually led us up to Deep Space Nine. And we were all very sorry when she ran off to join the Maquis, mostly because we never saw her again. Anyways, so this is set on a planet where you have these settlers who have wound up in conflict with a bunch of feral teenaged Klingons. Why are there a bunch of feral teenaged Klingons? The novel goes into this history that about 10 years previous, in a nearby system owned by the Klingons, or at least then part of the Klingon Empire, that there was conflict with the Romulans, because there's always conflict with the Romulans and the Klingons, between the Romulans and the Klingons, rather, and there was a transport ship filled with children that was basically trying to get the children away from the fight. And unfortunately, it was damaged and crash-landed on this planet, killing the pilot, who was basically the only adult there, and a fair number of the children, and the ones who were left were all under 10 years old. And so they basically raised themselves. So when they get to this planet, what you have is you have these Klingons who are very much in a Lord of the Flies sort of situation, but they're also Klingons who completely lack this heavy weight of culture that Klingons always carry with them. It's one of the things that you notice, particularly in Next Gen, is that Klingons have this huge, weighty culture. Like that, there are certain that, and it's not just that, they have this large amount of history and background and everything. The Bajoran culture gets elucidated, Vulcan culture gets elucidated. It's not that Klingons are unique in the Star Trek universe in terms of getting their culture and history and whatnot expanded on. But Klingons are one of the cultures that carry it with them everywhere, that everything they do tends to be weighted with their traditions and with their religious perspectives and with the weight of their considerations about honor and dignity and all of this kind of stuff. And you see this, of course, Worf is always hyper conscious of it because he's a Klingon raised by humans, and so he's sort of hyper aware and is a bit of a born again Christian sort of character when it comes to that. But even so, even when you're dealing with Klingons who are, less into that or less, obsessed with living up to their own internal standards, you still have this heavily ritualized culture. And it's something that, for example, the Bajorans might have been that way, but having all of the stuff that they went through with the Cardassian occupation has basically crushed away a large percentage of that ritualization and so on in their culture, because as a matter of survival, they've had to dispense with large portions of it. But it's very, very interesting because, of course, Worf is trying to bring these teenagers into a sort of a proper Klingon frame of mind and approach and all this kind of stuff. And these teenagers, they have no culture. They don't remember any of this. They've been raised without it. They've developed their own traditions and rituals. But at the same time, we know that those traditions and rituals have probably been very negatively affected by the quote-unquote goddess, because there's this Romulan spy who arrived with the settlers who decided to stir up trouble between the Klingons and the settlers for reasons which are never made clear. Partly because at the time that they have her captured, they're not asking those questions because it's not a useful time to ask those questions. And then she gets away and then she dies, so we'll probably never know what the point was. But she stirs up a lot of trouble and pretends to be a goddess, although one wonders if maybe that was just her, stroking her own ego. It's entirely possible. And I just, there are a couple of standout moments in this that I really, really like. One of which is Worf decides to do this ceremony called Ruhestai, which is supposed to be sort of a brotherhood, sisterhood, ritual. One assumes it's kind of a formal adoption into a family sort of notion. And he says, okay, we're going to do this. And he's like, okay, normally we'd use candles, but we don't have candles, so we're going to use these lights. And normally we'd have our sashes, but nobody's got sashes. So your chuck skins are like sashes because, they're representative of stuff. And then he's like, and then here's the final thing, the handshake. And I look at that and I wonder, with his massively improvised little ritual, because at the end of this, the two Klingon teens who sort of befriend Worf and Troi and Data, actually, who are along for the bulk of this attempt to befriend these Klingon teens, that I wonder, because those two decide that what they really want to do is they want to go back to the Klingon Empire, learn all the things about being Klingon, and then bring the culture back to Selva, where, all of the rest of their, little family is, and teach them all about being Klingon. And I just wonder what it must have been like to get to the Klingon Empire and discover, A, exactly how much weight of ritual there is, which would probably be very off-putting for the both of them, but also this handshake thing, totally not a Klingon thing, totally just a human thing, totally something Worf was in many ways just making up. I also love the thing with the holodeck. When they first get Turok on board, the settlers have been horrible. They've gotten a hold of him, and they've basically chained him up in a shed because they're terrified of him, and they, basically don't want anything to do with him and stuff. So they've got him chained up in a shed. And so the Enterprise basically rescues him, beams him out. And in order to calm him down, they send him to the holodeck, where he can be in a forested environment that is at least somewhat like Selva, and it'll help calm him down to be in a place that he doesn't feel is totally alien and weird and sterile and whatnot. So Worf joins him there, and, it sort of talks him through the idea that there are other Klingons in the world, that we have to make friends with the Flatheads, and so on and so forth. And so Worf takes him back to Selva, and they go and they find the other Klingons, and eventually they make friends after much back and forth and angst and who's it. But they wind up having to rescue him again and bring him back on the Enterprise, and he asks to go see the forest, and so they say, sure, I mean, why not? He wants to spend some time on the holodeck, we can send him to the holodeck, and he doesn't realize the holodeck isn't real. And so when Worf gets there, Turok is like, I'll just stay here. I'll make friends with those Klingons over there, the ones doing picnics and having picnics and stuff, and it'll be great. I won't bother anybody. This is great. I don't want to go home. I like this. And Worf is forced to say this isn't a real forest, and those aren't real Klingons, and so he says to the computer, computer, delete, families, and the families, of course, immediately disappear. And Turok looks at Worf, stricken, and says, is all of reality like this? Is everything not real? Can everything vanish with... And he basically starts panicking that he's a brain in a box being held by a demon. Or possibly that he is... or possibly that... possibly that he is, being trapped somewhere in a coma with his brain in a computer, with, people in fancy long leather coats doing acrobatics around flying bullets. I mean, I'm sure there are other metaphors that go along. There are other works of fiction that play with that, but the point is, he starts to panic about that, and Worf's response is an incredibly awkward, you're starting to wander into philosophy, which I know absolutely nothing about. And I'm really not here to debate the nature of reality with you. So can we get back to talking about getting your people out of, trouble and stuff? And I kind of love it because the whole scene is just so awkward. And yet Worf has just shaken Turok's world to its foundations by casually asking the computer to modify a program. And it is amazing and sad and hilarious, and I love it. Anyways, so that's everything that I have to say right now. Also, I'm running out of time, so, I couldn't say anything else if I wanted to, and that's everything, and I will see you all next week.